In today's episode, Jaimee Hall sits down with Vince Reese from Mickes O'Toole to discuss the importance of diversity in the legal industry. Welcome to the Law Firm Launch Podcast.
Welcome, everyone who's currently listening to the Law Firm Launch Podcast. I'm Jaimee Hall, your host with Legal Back Office, and I am very excited to welcome our guest, Vince Reese, onto the podcast today. Vince is the managing partner of Mickes O'Toole and someone that I really highly respect within our industry. And so, Vince, do a quick intro of yourself, and thank you again for joining me today.
Thanks, Jaimee. I'm glad to be here. My name is Vince Reese. I'm the managing partner of Mickes O'Toole here in St. Louis, Missouri. We are a 22 lawyer law firm here. I've been practicing law for about 20 some odd years. I spent the first 17 or 18 years of my practice at a large downtown law firm. And then in 2016, I and some of my partners decided to leave that law firm, and we came to Mickes O'Toole. And over the course of the past, 5 years, we've grown substantially. And so that's sort of in a nutshell my career. It's all been here in St. Louis and been at two firms. So there you go.
Easy to tell, right? Easy history. Well, I really love, I'm so glad that you're on today specifically, as a part of our diversity series with our podcast, because I've been just really, really impressed with, Mickes O'Toole's sort of emphasis and focus on having people in leadership that are women and minorities, and sort of moving forward this very, very important conversation around diversity, and not just Mickes O'Toole sort of having that focus, I think, is really cool. But also it's an example of a long existing brand that's now existing beyond, its original founders. And I know, Tom O'Toole is still around. But the fact that the firm has really got this forward-looking perspective, it's just unique in our industry. It really is, to be thinking about the future and how we are going to exist long, beyond our founders, and sort of adapting to what our society and culture is demanding. So I've always been very impressed with what the firm has been doing, and especially under your leadership.
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Why don't we start off just tell us, right, about, this is a conversation amongst friends, right, about, your interactions within the industry, your experience, especially like through that lens of racial diversity.
Yeah, no, it's so my experiences have been, I think, typical for attorneys of color in the legal industry, especially in St. Louis, so to speak, but probably very typical as they would be across the country. I remember when I, as a 1L law student, you go to your first summer internship, and, I was at a large law firm. So I think we had 15 or 16 summer interns. I was the only attorney of color in that internship class.
Wow.
I ended up accepting my offer for that law firm. A couple years later, I started there. I was the only attorney of color that started at the time I did as an associate. At the time, there was another associate of color, but that person left. And so I probably spent the majority of my years being the only associate of color in my law firm. And then at one point, I became the only non-equity partner of color. And when I became an equity partner, there were a couple other attorneys of color who were equity partners. And so I joined them. And so there were a few of us at that point in time. And I highlight that because you asked about my experience and how that shaped me. There's a couple of things that I was kind of left with as I kind of reflect back upon it. Certainly I can say that it at times was an isolating experience. There was a feeling of being unique, different, apart, in some sense from your colleague in that sense. And so there was a little bit of an isolation effect, because you're aware that you're, similar if you're a woman or an attorney of color. If you're the only woman in a room of 25 men, you kind of understand that you're the only woman there, and you feel that no matter how welcoming they may be, you still are very conscious of that fact.
Yeah.
And that was sort of my experience for the majority of, the vast majority of my legal career was in that sort of context and in that kind of space of sort of being there, but also being very cognizant of my uniqueness, and that I was sort of very sort of in some respects isolated from some of my colleagues in that respect. So I think that has, when I decided to switch firms 5 years ago, that experience was certainly something that resonated with me, and it sort of drove some of the decisions I made as I was thinking about leaving my firm, where I was going to go to, and more importantly, what I wanted to do after I left the firm. So when I came to Mickes O'Toole, I saw it as an opportunity to really for a variety of things, to me personally, to become more involved in the running and the management of a firm, but then also really as an opportunity to put into practice some of the things that I had always thought in the back of my head, like the what ifs. What if we did this? What if we did that? Why can't we do this? Why can't we do that? And so it was a unique opportunity for me to put some of those things into practice and to really try to see if, putting those things into practice could actually lead to better results in the context of having a more diverse and inclusive working environment in the legal profession.
Yeah, I think that's amazing. So based on some of the things that you've done, even just practically, like what do you want to see law firms doing differently? Some of the practical things that you've done, what would you like to see firms doing over the next couple of years, just to be like creating more of a positive part of these discussions and really trying to affect change?
Yeah. So one of the things from my perspective, when it comes to diversity in the legal profession, well, first and foremost, I think I look at it from this perspective. I know that law firms and the legal industry has been working on the issue of diversity for decades, right? It's been going on for decades. It's not a new initiative. It's something that started way before I got into the profession and is continuing on now. So it's an ongoing issue that we continue to work on. But I think if you look at the demographic data and statistics, you'll see that we sort of reached a point of stagnation as to where we are. I mean, the numbers today are not markedly different in most senses than they were 20 years ago. Mm-hmm. And so there's lots of effort going into it, or a lot of people being very cognizant of the situation, but we're not making the type of progress that you would expect to make if you were, with 2 decades more of concerted effort.
Right.
And so from my perspective, one of the things that I think that I took away from that is that there needs to be an intentionality to what you're doing, and what more so than, it's one thing to say that we value diversity and we're very open to having a diverse and inclusive work environment. But what I've really come to learn is that takes effort and energy and a very strategic plan to achieve, and it's difficult, right? And it's not something that probably can be achieved in a year or 2 or 3 years, but it's one of those initiatives that takes a prolonged, sustained kind of effort. And so, for me personally, I think that when I look at what we're trying to do at our firm, and I look at firms that are successful in this area, that's one of the key drivers. Is that they have made the pursuit of a more diverse and inclusive work environment a priority, and a significant priority within their firm. They've committed to doing it. They've committed to doing it not just for a year or 2 years or 5 years, but they've committed to doing it on a prolonged basis. And I think that's sort of what you have to do, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes total sense. And I agree with you. It takes effort, right? Because this isn't a situation where we can just say, right? We have to actually walk the talk,
yep.
Not just talk the talk, right? So in a firm that's really saying, okay, we do want to walk the talk, right? What do those things look like? What is a diversity initiative that's actually meaningful? That takes the effort and the time? What does that look like? What does that take for a firm? For a firm that's going to say to you, Vince, tell me where to start. Where should I start?
Yeah. So a couple of different things. One is, as I told you, when I switched law firms, one of the things I was looking forward to is the opportunity to sort of put some thoughts into practice, right? So to see hey, let's try this and see what happens, right? And one of the things that I came up with is, as I was trying to work within our firm and increase our diversity, increase our inclusiveness, one of the things that on the beginning part of that, the diversity part of it, one of the things that I became aware of is that, You have to do more, in my mind. If just saying that, hey, we're open, we're welcoming. You have to really be strategic, and by meaning that is, you need to go out and be proactive. So when we are looking to hire an attorney, whether that be a new associate or lateral, we are very focused on. We want to certainly hire a very qualified attorney, but we're out looking for attorneys that will add to our diversity, and we're looking for both, right? And so it's not. We put the ad out, or we put our feelers out. We wait for the applications to come to us. I really tap into my network. I tap into people I know, and I ask them. I'm like, hey, who's out there? Who would you recommend? Who is looking for maybe a change of scenery or a new opportunity? And you start asking those questions. But you ask those questions in the context of spaces where you're more likely to draw diverse talent, right? So you ask those questions in spaces where you're more likely to get, those people of attorneys of color or women. And so you ask in that space, and therefore you get a higher proportion of referrals in that space, which means you have a higher proportion of maybe getting the right candidate coming in. So, and I think that's a very targeted approach, so to speak.
Yeah, no, that's a very good example, because, the idea of sourcing candidates in small firms especially is not a methodology that most small firms embrace, just because they don't have an HR department typically, sure. Right? So yeah. You've got an office manager, legal assistant that's just trying to kind of help out the lawyer, help out the managing partner. And so they just throw a job posting up there. Well, whoever applies for the job posting, that's who we're going to consider. So the idea of actually sourcing candidates is a concept that all law firms should be doing to get the best possible candidates. Anyway, the best ones are the ones that aren't looking, yeah. Right?
No, that's exactly it. So you ask those questions to other people about, because you're right. You get the ones who are, hey, I've got a job and I'm happy in my job, but I'm open to a prospect, and then you approach that person, right? And typically, if they have a job and they're happy in their job, but they're open to a prospect, 9 times out of 10, they're already successful in their job. They're already doing good work in their job, which is why they're not out in the market looking. And so your chances of getting a high quality candidate to go up at that point, So that's at least one way that we've been fairly successful. The other way is sort of a variation of that is, when we go out and look, whether we like it or not, things have a way of self-perpetuating themselves, right? So, if you have a diverse firm, and then you look, for example, we also not only externally do we ask my external network for candidates. I'm very conscious about, if I know we have an opening, walking into to other attorneys at my firm and saying, "Hey, we're going to hire. We're looking to hire. Is there anyone you know?" And I ask that question about all the attorneys that are in my firm, right? Because that's an internal network. And I make sure that they know that we're looking for someone, because I remember, being at a large law firm, and I remember lateral candidates coming in, this person got hired, this person got hired. And but I never knew we were looking for somebody. I never knew we were in the market for someone. Right. And so perhaps if I had known that, there might've been people that I knew that I would have said, well, hey, what about this person? What about that person? But if no one's actually coming to you and asking that question, then you don't have the chance to give that input. And then what I'll also say is, this gets into the self-perpetuating thing is, if you have a diverse environment, and you're asking diverse people at your own firm for candidates, you're also increasing the likelihood that they're going to give you referrals for diverse candidates as well.
Yep. No, that's great. The internal promotion, of job openings is huge. And I like too your advice earlier about, getting engaged with, segments of, your bar association, that you're going to get a more diverse pool of candidates from, and that is relationship building and takes time. So, showing up to the WLA, the Women in Legal, the Women in Legal Association, or whatever it stands for, WLA, showing up to those events, being engaged in those events, though that's building relationships and getting your brand known too in more diverse circles, so that when you do have an opening, you're able to, already have equity sort of built up in those relationships that you've developed with those organizations.
No, that's exactly it. And you mentioned brand. I'm glad you mentioned that, because that's something else. So as our firm, was not traditionally a firm, that was high in diversity, especially for attorneys of color, if you go back historically back in time. And so, so I know already when we go out there that, that we're marketing ourselves, we're sort of rebranding ourselves. And so one of the things that I try to do is, whether it's a Minority Bar Association, or whether it's the WLA or any other event like that, any other association like that, I try to make sure that we market ourselves, that we get our brand out there, and then we get our message out there to them about what we, where we are today and where we see ourselves going in the future, right? So that people are judging us by where we are today and where we're going in the future, and not because there may be people who remember the firm from 15 years ago who have a different concept of what the firm is than what it is today.
Yep. No, I think I'm really glad that you mentioned that brand consistency, because I think it goes back to, are you just talking the talk or walking the talk, right? Like you can say the right things and put things out on your website or social media, but if you don't reflect internally the things that you're actually saying, people are going to pick up on that, and they're going to see that as disingenuous.
No, I agree. And then, so all the things I've talked about thus far have really been about trying to attract and bring in candidates, but I think we also have to talk about the other half of that, the equation, which is keeping candidates, and making sure that those candidates are successful and included once you actually get them, right? Because the other issue that I think we're struggling at in the legal profession is the fact that, law firms, especially some of the, will bring in lots of diverse associates, but there is a bleeding of those and hemorrhaging of those associates out as time goes on, so that by the time you get to, your senior associate, non-equity partner, and even especially your equity partner status, they're no longer there at the firm, right? And they've gone to other things. Some of them have gone to work in-house. Some have gone to work for government or public or other agencies. And some have gotten out of legal profession altogether, right? And so how do you stem that tide? And I think that's the other half of the equation. And this goes back to what I said earlier about, those feelings of being isolated, and being one, the only one of whatever that demographic is. I think there has to be an intentionality to reaching out and being inclusive to the attorneys you already have, right? Because if you're constantly bringing attorneys in, but you're losing them, then you're not making any progress. And I think that's, in some respects, I think that's a lot of what we've done over the last 2 decades is we've focused so much of our efforts on the bringing people in the door, but we haven't focused as much on the how do we make it more inclusive for people once they're there, that we're losing, any gains we're making on the front end, we're losing on the back end, so to speak. And so I think that sort of effort on the inclusiveness is the piece that I think we also have to focus on.
Yeah, and I'm really glad that you said that, because my last question of you was around, like, what is your best advice for that lawyer that's sitting in the boardroom or the meeting room, and they're the one attorney of color in the room, like the person that's the lawyer that's feeling isolated. What advice do you have for them in terms of charting sort of their approach and their career?
That's an interesting thing, right? Because I think, and this is one of the things that, we all learn from our mistakes or how we did things in the past, right? So when I look at myself, if I could give my younger self advice, it would probably be to be a little more outgoing, a little more assertive, a little more taking control of my career and my destiny, right? I think not for everyone, but for a lot of people, when you are in that situation where you're, you feel isolated, your tendency is to sort of keep your head down, focus on doing your work, and just try to, that sort of tunnel vision kind of thing, right? And you don't necessarily think about, well, do I need to make sure that I'm going out and that people know who I am, or know what I'm doing, or know what my capabilities are, or even that people know what I want to do, what I'm looking for the next stage of my career, right? And sort of that self-promotion, that self-advocacy kind of thing. I think for a lot of, for a lot of attorneys of color, I think that self-advocacy, that self-promotion piece can be a little difficult for them to do. And I don't presume to know it from the female standpoint, but my experiences of talking to some of my female colleagues have been sort of that's a very similar aspect with them as well. That self-promotion, self-advocacy piece is there. And so I think being more confident in trying to do that, I think, is what you can do to help yourself in that respect. Because I think sometimes people, if you don't self-promote or you don't self-advocate, or if you don't say, hey, this is something I want to do, or will you help me do this? If you don't ask, then sometimes you get overlooked, or people overlook you. And then you find yourself years down the road trying to figure out, like, how did I get here, or how do I get back to where I want to be?
Right. No, I think that's really great advice. I found myself in a similar position in my career where I was looking for, other women in leadership roles in our industry to bounce ideas off of, get feedback, share. And I couldn't find many because, legal administration is typically all women, but women don't usually have a seat at that strategy table. And it's just a completely different set of issues and different conversation when you're sitting down around a boardroom talking about the future of the firm and profitability than when you're talking about, how do we keep our billing as efficient as possible. They're just two different conversations. And
Right.
so I can totally relate to, that needing to sort of grab a hold of what you need. And I sort of had to seek out, mentors and try to just call up a few people and say, can I talk to you? Because I can't really find anyone. I'm struggling. And I think that's really great advice, that you are more in control than you probably realize, right? And that, you can sort of assert a little bit more and sort of take control of your destiny, so to speak, by, obtaining the things that you need to help yourself to grow in your career. So I think that's great advice.
No, I think what you said was really important, because that's the one piece too, and that I think you were talked about, reaching outside of your particular company, your particular firm, reaching out into a network. And I think that is a really a key piece, right? Because when you think about if you're an attorney of color or you're a woman and you find yourself when there's not a lot of internal people that you can talk to or bounce ideas off of, instead of sort of shutting down at that point, I think reaching out to the group, right?
Yeah.
Because I remember early in my career, the idea of calling up another attorney at a different law firm and saying, "Hey, can I talk to you?" Whatever, was sort of like, well, they're the competitor, right? They're the firm we're competing against. Why would I call them? But I think as I got older in my career, and I got a little more experience, I realized that was a great resource that I hadn't availed myself of. You know what I mean? And
Right.
that there's a benefit to going out there and talking to them, other individuals at other firms. And I think that sometimes that's what you have to do.
Yep, absolutely. I give that advice to people a lot that are asking about, young professionals that are looking for leadership experience, and they're not getting that people leadership experience that they want in their current job. Maybe it's a large company and they're just not getting promoted. Maybe they want to be promoted faster than what that culture usually accommodates. And my advice is always go volunteer. I can tell you, any nonprofit that you step into and start working for and say, I want to lead this thing, can I organize a group of volunteers? They're going to say yes. Every time they're going to say yes.
Exactly.
Get leadership experience in a different context that doesn't always, have to mean your job promoted you and now you are a manager of these people and these processes. Go get the experience if you're not getting it where you're at. So
yeah, and one thing I'll say is this. So we've been focusing on your question was like, what can you do to help yourself, right? And I think all of the things we've talked about are excellent tools, excellent suggestions. But I'll also take a minute and put on my hat as a managing partner of a law firm, as a manager, as an owner of a business, and say that, if you're in one of those categories where you are the managing partner or a partner or a business practice group leader, I think one of the things you have to ask yourself, and this is a question you ask yourself, is what am I doing to promote diversity, to promote inclusiveness within my firm, my group, my department, or whatever it is, right? Because I think that's a responsibility of leadership. And I think a lot of the times, to your point, we may be looking at, how do I make this group more productive? How do I, increase our productivity or the quality of our work? But sometimes leaders aren't as focused on those sort of soft things like inclusiveness within their work environment, right? And I think that's that's one of the areas where I think we're not collectively spending enough time and energy to stop that sort of bleeding out the door. Because I think of it this way. Almost anybody that's been very successful can look back and find along the way people who have invested in them as a person, right? Somebody who's helped them along the way. Mm-hmm. And I know a lot of people consider themselves to be self-made individuals, but I mean, I think if you really are true to yourself and look back, somewhere along the way, somebody helped you, somebody invested in you, somebody spent time and energy on you, right? And so what I would say, the other thing that, in addition to people self-advocating, I think it's important for leaders, if we're really trying to make a more diverse, inclusive work environment, is to take the time and the energy when you have those resources, those people in front of you, to make a conscious decision and saying, I'm going to get to know this person. I'm going to invest in this person. Yeah. I'm going to make sure that I do what I can to help this person succeed, right? Because ultimately, you know this from being a manager as well, is if you have a group of people that you invest in and they're succeeding, you're going to get better performance overall, right? And that's how you as an organization get better. So spending the time and energy to invest in people, I think is a key requirement if we're really going to try to make progress there, right? And then also, on that same token, asking the hard questions when you lose an attorney. Whether it be a woman or an attorney of color, asking yourself, why did that happen? How did that happen? Yeah. What could we have done differently? Right? Because that's your learning experience. That's when you can decide what do we have to change so that we can prevent this from happening again.
Yep. I think that's a really great point. I've just been kind of sort of writing down some notes as you've been talking, because I think there's been some consistent threads throughout our conversation, and sort of starting with that intention. It takes being intentional about what you're looking to accomplish, and it's not enough to just talk the talk, right? There's actual effort and action and work that goes into building a company that embraces diversity and that embraces the all of humanity, right? And trying to create an environment that is more diverse in how we're getting the best talent in the door takes us actually having that intention and then acting on it, right? And doing something about it. And then I liked your point too, just about, okay, now we've done a good job of getting people in the door. Now we have to do a good job of keeping those people here. And, that idea of, okay, to the lonely or the person feeling isolated, that's a person of color, or a woman that's in an environment where they feel they're the only one. There's an action for them too. There's an action associated with taking control of your career and the things that you need in order to be able to be successful and move forward. And that idea of action keeps coming up, right? Time and time again. We can talk about it all day long, but at the end of the day, there's action required, both as a leader and owner of a company, and in how we push down the importance, of this vision is really important, so that everybody is acting and sort of rowing in the same direction on this boat, but also to those individuals that are looking to, grow in their careers. There's an action required to get the things that you need, whether that's inside your organization or outside your organization. So I just kind of been hearing that thread throughout. The action is what's really important.
I agree. It is the action. And the other thing I'll say too is, we sometimes we get caught up in thinking that it has to be these huge, bold initiatives and huge, bold actions, right? Sure. And in actuality, I think in some respects, it's the small actions, right? It's a lot of small actions are actually probably more impactful than one large action, right? Yep. So for example, if there is a new client that comes in the door, right, and you're going to go out and meet that client, and you're going to bring somebody with you, right, to meet that client. Well, we're all creatures of habit, right? So we tend to gravitate whatever the well-worn path is, right? But sometimes getting back to that intentionality, the intentionality is going outside of that well-worn path, right? Yeah. So instead of saying, oh yeah, I'm going to take this person with me, saying, well, wait a minute, is there someone else I should take with me? Is there someone else who have not afforded this opportunity up to this point, or who might actually benefit from this opportunity more than the person I'm used to taking, with me on this.
Yeah.
And those, to me, it's those sort of, I talk to people all the time about how this works, right? So think about the analogy I always use is, how many times have you gotten in your car at the end of the day and you start driving home and your mind is someplace else, and before you know it, you're all the way home, or on the other way, you've actually missed your turn because you're driving to work instead of the store, even though you need to go to the store, right? It's amazing how our mind operates. You could be driving a car 60 miles an hour down the highway, not really focused on where you're going, and your subconscious mind is telling you, slow down, turn right, turn left, get off on this exit, stop at the stoplight, and before you know it, you're there. So we make all these decisions based on our subconscious, right? And so I think part of when we talk about that intentionality, that action, it's trying to bring some of our decision-making processes from our subconscious to our conscious, right? So instead of saying, oh, I need to get these 3 things done, and going into autopilot and going down the path that I'm so used to doing, stopping and saying, wait a minute, I need to get these 3 things done, but is there a different path that I need to go on, or is there a better path, or should I try a different path? You know what I mean? Yeah. And that sort of intentionality, I think, can make a huge difference.
I think that's huge. I think that's a great sort of note to end on too, is, my whole adult life and young adult life, I even as a teenager, has been shaped a lot by Robert Frost. And, the road not taken has been a similar theme, I feel like, throughout my life. 2 roads diverged in a wood, and I took the road less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. And the road less traveled is not always the easy road. In fact, it's usually not the easy road. There's a little bit more brush to clear away, a lot more action, a lot more work that goes into it. But it truly does make all the difference. Yeah. And so I do appreciate you sort of bookending us and wrapping on that, as that it takes action, but also reflection and kind of sort of getting outside of how we would normally think about things, because, this is a very important, having our firms and our industry celebrating our differences and having our differences actually involved in decision-making and strategy. And it's very important, I think, to our businesses being able to be the most successful they can possibly be. So this isn't just important, it's critical. It's critical for our industry and, for our business in general.
No, I think you're right. And I know we're wrapping up, but I think, this idea that, if you look at any statistical study, they'll always tell you that diverse teams and diversity of thought, is the best way to get best results. Right. And you get diversity of thought by having diverse people come together, and if you think about it, especially in the legal profession, we're constantly trying to come up with the newest, greatest legal argument, the newest, best way to do something, something new, something creative, something inventive, that gives our clients, a competitive edge, or helps them fulfill what they're trying to do. Well, if that's what you're really trying to do, if you're trying to be new, creative, and inventive, come up with better ways to do something, then I think having the most diverse team approaching that is probably going to be your best way to get that result.
Yep. No, absolutely. This has been awesome. Thank you so much for your time. It's incredibly valuable, but not just your time. I just appreciate you sharing your experiences. And I know the people listening to the podcast now are going to enjoy what you've had to say. And I'm grateful for you. I'm glad we're friends now and that we got connected. And thank you. Thank you so much for doing this with me.
Happy to do it. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Vince.
Thanks for tuning in today. Be sure to hit subscribe or go to legalbackoffice.com for more info.